Buenos días, mi gente. Qué bueno estar con ustedes. Tenemos una mujer muy poderosa con nosotros. Hoy día, we have a powerful Latina with us, Marilyn Alvario.
Alvario.
Because we just talked about the fact that this is kind of a special name. I haven't heard it before.
Yeah, the origins are from Spain. So Jose Alvario came in the 1800s to Puerto Rico and started the Alvario clan
Whoa.
in San Lorenzo, and now it's a huge clan down there.
Oh, great. So we're going to have to go down to Puerto Rico to meet all the relatives.
In fact, you know one, Rita Moreno is an Alvario.
That's right. But I want to tell you all about Marilyn before we get going. You can see how personable she is. It's so exciting to have her here. I've worked with her for years because she has this incredible organization called Latinas in Power, which is in Connecticut. So we are traveling the whole United States to meet these amazing Latina leaders. Well, she's really an expert in multicultural communication and marketing before that was a thing. 20 years having worked for Aetna and Mass Mutual and really helped them with their ethnic and multicultural marketing for over 20 years. And then she got the spirit to start this Latinas in Power, which has been going now for 20 years.
22, I'm going into my 22nd year.
Okay, especially for those of you that are young and who go like, how can anyone do something for 22 years? Well, the secret is you just show up every day and do what you need to do. And when it's time to go, you'll know. And when it's time to stay, you'll stay. So what an incredible thing. And it's not only the largest Latina conference really on the East Coast almost, but in Connecticut and Northern United States. But she has started a leadership program, which is so important. That's what we're talking about today is Latina Leaders Rising. And you're going to start your 4th class, correct?
We'll start our third.
Your 3rd class.
So yeah, cohort 3. We're just finishing interviews for cohort 3.
Fabulous.
So they will be starting in September of this year, and then cohort 4 will be in March of 2025. So we're running 2 a year right now.
And so she's marching forward. Let me just say that. There's very few organizations that are running 2 leadership programs. And, you know, when we talk about leadership, Latino leadership is critical mass leadership. We have to have a lot of leaders on the ground because of our numbers, our youth, our immigration, all the issues that we're facing. And so I really commend you for taking that helm and saying, I'm going to create all these leaders in Connecticut and beyond because you're going national, correct?
Yeah, we have been scaling slowly, just organically. And now we have a new plan in place to scale out throughout the country and then translate into Spanish and move on to Central and South America.
Now, check that out. Now, there's a woman with a vision. Anyway, Marilyn and I have something really in common that I wanted to share. First of all, I have on my hat because I wanted to look cool for her. We're going to put up a picture of her in her Puerto Rican hat looking very cool so you can see how we roll. And but second of all, I wanted to tell you that when I do a speech and when Marilyn does a speech, we do salsa as we come onto the stage. And I was watching you do your steps. Come on, give us a little bit of it. And I said, God darn, that Marilyn's even better than me.
I absolutely.
You got that Puerto Rican movement.
I do spins. I grab people in the audience. We start dancing. And I have a DJ at my conference. So it's not your standard corporate conference. It's just, it really gets people, like, breaks the ice and gets people to a place where, oh, this is different, coming to a Latina conference. And so it works. It works.
Absolutely. I've been using music with my programs forever. I have people singing and dancing. And you know, that's one of the principles of leadership that I promote, which is called Gozar la Vida, or enjoy life or celebrate life. I always think about like Celia Cruz's last song, you know, La Vida es un carnival. And she goes through all the things we have to deal with, but then says to us, enjoy life. Or Canta no llores is another one that says that, or Mark Anthony, Vivir, Vivir. So Latinos are bringing salsa to America, not just great salsa to eat, but salsa to dance. And we have to bring that flavor because America needs a little salsa.
You know, speaking of salsa real quick, I think it was about 15 years ago that salsa outsold ketchup
Oh, it was in the 90s.
in the marketplace. It was about
Yeah,
15
in the
years ago
90s.
that happened. So yeah, so Latinos have arrived, and we have so much to share in terms of our culture, and our enthusiasm and the joy that we bring to almost every situation, which is something that people really appreciate.
Yeah, I think Latinos coined work hard, play hard.
I agree.
And we love to have fiestas. We invented the word fiesta, and so that's so important because I always say it gives us the energy to do the hard work we have to do. And it also builds community, builds memories, people enjoy themselves. I always laugh because I say, I know a lot of Latino dancers, and I mean leaders, and I've danced with almost all of them. That's up close and personal,
Right.
Anyway, tell us what it was like to be in ethnic or multicultural marketing way back. I mean, today we're living in a different thing with diversity and inclusion, but way back then, Marilyn, what are the doors you opened? What are some of the challenges you had?
Right, right. Well, yeah, so it's been over 20 years, actually closer to 25 years, when I was a leader in a corporate 100, in a Fortune 100 company. And as a director, as a national director of diversity markets is what they reference it to, you really have to be able to build a business case that you could sell the idea of how important it is to be able to build the kind of relationships that are needed in the Latino community, because it's all about
and I love the word relationships.
And so even just selling that idea, because most companies look at the bottom line, what is our return on investment immediately, without thinking that building the relationship is the foundation first. And sometimes that takes a little bit longer in our community. It could take a year, it could take 2 years, it could take 5 years. And the problem that we overcome sometimes in the multicultural market space is that we're dealing with the start-stop mentality of companies.
Or let's do it real quick.
Yes, you have to either do it quick or it's eliminated and all of that. So that was kind of like the biggest challenge. But once they started to see like the actual impact and outcome and the contributions that we were making to the overall company. For example, I was at Aetna. We had gotten an award for the President's Award that year because we brought in $800 million in assets under management under the banner of diversity markets. And so then people started paying attention, going, oh, wait, maybe this relationship thing is really working. So
yeah, so don't forget, when you're trying to move something or trying to convince people, or a new program, or open up a new market segment, you got to do your homework. You got to have the facts. You have to be able to show why it's an effective strategy, which I think we can do now, because I mean, we're like the 4th largest market as far as being consumers in this country and in the world, really.
Right. And it really is understanding the diversity within diversity of the Latino culture.
Yes.
We are not a homogeneous culture. And so being able to explain that in a corporate setting of how important it is, then when you're on the West Coast, there's more of a Mexican influence. When you're in the Northeast, there's more of a Puerto Rican influence. And now with all
Dominicano. And all the other Central Americans and the Venezolanos who have come. Well, one thing I've mentioned before in the interviews is that the mainstream culture is a homogeneous culture. They like conformity. They like to keep it simple, such as ketchup, as opposed to salsa, which, every batch is different. And so Latinos come from this multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial, multinational kind of background, and that's the future. So regardless of whether people are comfortable with it or not, especially with young people, intersectionality, they want to be all they can be. And so Latinos really offer a model for that, because we are not a homogeneous community. We love diversity. We love differences. We love uniqueness. We love the new.
And that is why, and one of the main reasons why we are positioned to become one of the most influential leaders of leadership in this country because we come from diverse backgrounds. We have worked within very diverse communities based on our own families and our communities. And we even the whole idea of colorism within our communities is something that we are really welcoming of, we are really accepting of, and have been able to work with people of all different colors and backgrounds and accents within our own communities, which positions us to be very effective in a multicultural world that we live in today.
Yeah, no, I say we're the prototype. So
Yep.
watch. If you don't believe us, just watch, because, we have this inclusive bienvenido spirit on top of it. Latinos are so inclusive and so generous, and they value people so much that it just makes sense that we would embrace others, embrace the other. And not only that, but learn from them and enjoy them. I mean, I love, for example, reggae and African-American music, but I love my salsa. And I love
why when you come in dancing salsa, I come in dancing salsa, people walk away saying, I felt so welcomed.
Yes.
So good at being able to make people feel comfortable within our space.
Well, Marilyn, we're going to talk about Latinas in Power, but I want people to know about you. How did you come from Puerto Rico? What is your background? Kind of what inspired you to do what you're doing? Because we're still standing. You and I have been doing this for many, many decades, and we love it, and we want to keep contributing. So tell us a little bit about you and how you got here.
First of all, Juana, you have paved the way for so many of us. I just want you to know that I have viewed you as one of the women out here that has inspired me to do the work that I'm doing.
Oh, that's so nice.
Thank you to you, because you have been paving the way. I stand on the shoulder of many women like you throughout my whole life. But my parents came from Puerto Rico in the 1950s to Connecticut. My father went to the Bronx first and said, no, aquí no me quedo. I didn't want to raise his family.
Too crowded.
And so he moved to Connecticut, and that is where I was. So I was born in Meriden, Connecticut, raised in New Britain, Connecticut, and it was a very tight-knit Puerto Rican community. So I was raised.
Oh, there was. That's really, because, you don't think of Puerto Ricanos up in Connecticut, but we are everywhere.
Well, yeah, we're over 700,000 now in Connecticut. But at the time, in the 1950s and 60s, the Puerto Rican community, we were dealing with racism and discrimination. I'm being called derogatory things as we were growing up. And so the Puerto Rican community and the families that were intact were very close. There was like 12 families, Puerto Rican families, and all had kids. And every Sunday we would head to the beach together, and we would take a pig and make the hole and roast the pig on the beach. And the Americanos would look at us like, what are you doing? So we
used to bring the whole kitchen. We would go to the beach.
And so growing up, culture, language, music, food was always at the center of what we celebrated and what we had the orgullo around. We were so proud of our background.
That makes my heart sing, because the pobre Mexicanos on the other side of the U.S. were really suffering from not having that kind of juntitos, que estamos juntos, and me also, because when I immigrated, there wasn't that kind of community. So
I spoke Spanish first. I mean, when I went into schools, I only spoke Spanish in the home. So I'm fully bilingual, bicultural today because of that whole experience of my parents saying, no, ser puertorriqueño es un orgullo, whereas many families had told their children, only speak English.
Yes.
We leave your culture behind, and we have to become American.
Well, they were trying to help the children be successful.
We didn't grow up that way.
Right.
We grew up with our Latinaness, on our shoulder, on our, in our heart, and always expressing that. Interestingly enough, later on in life, it was one of the challenges and barriers, because of our Latinaness, sometimes as we show it, is not always accepted in the way that the American culture, wants you to adapt to the norm, right? So sometimes that gets in the way. Too bad.
I think that's true, except I think it's changing today.
It is changing today.
I teach this thing called the Latino advantage now, that now we have an advantage because we've been educated in dominant culture institutions. We've grown up
Right.
in mainstream society, but we are value added now.
Absolutely.
But when I was growing up, that's why you and I are kind of like pioneers, because we had to make that transition from where
Absolutely.
it was, you had to kind of not disguise your Latino-ness, but you had to fit in and wait and see what you could do in order to be yourself. Even the earrings you have on today, you couldn't wear back then. You know,
One of the
and if they
reasons I
look
like
at,
to wear these earrings is to show my culture and my
that's
identity,
right.
and what we celebrate. But going back to growing up, I didn't experience that. I experienced always being proud of your identity and of your culture and sharing that with others. It was never a, hey, keep your culture quiet, or, you know, try to fit in. I never experienced that growing up. And I think that that inspired me. My parents did not have an education. My mother had a third grade education in Puerto Rico, my father a fifth grade education. For them, graduating from high school would have been a big deal.
Exactly.
Fortunately for me, you know, like I didn't have that experience of having parents that understood what education really meant, what homework meant, what going parent teacher meetings. My parents never stepped into a school. They didn't know that was part of what an
Exactly.
education is. So you didn't have that kind of support. As a result, Juana, I was in the bottom quarter of my class in high school. I was told by my teachers that I was not smart enough, that I was probably going to, you know, be a secretary, which there's nothing wrong with a secretary,
Right.
or work in a bank as a bank teller, and that was going to be my future. That's what they told me. Even when I went to my counselors and said, hey, I heard these people are taking algebra and biology, and they said, oh, Marilyn, you're just not smart enough. Fortunately for me,
Wow.
affirmative action came around. 1971, I was graduating from high school, and they were recruiting inner city kids to go to a state college at the time. And there were 2 Puerto Rican and 2 Black students from each school that was selected. Summer of 1971. I got selected to go to the University of Connecticut, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
In Source, Connecticut. And I went through an 8-week remedial program. It was called the Summer Program for Inner City Kids. And I made it through. I entered college as a regular student that fall. And guess what happened? I ended up on the dean's list the very first year in college.
Wow.
This is a kid from the bottom quarter. So it's kind of the Pygmalion effect there a little bit, to say, you give us an opportunity and we will demonstrate that we could, you know, we could deliver on and even go beyond the expectations of what the limitations that are put on us.
Right.
I think it's, you know, one of the things that opened up my world to not falling into the whole that whole crack of living on welfare, getting pregnant, you know, being on drugs, which many of the people in my community, that's where they landed. And so I really feel that I was given an opportunity, and that is what inspires me today. I was given an opportunity, and it's my responsibility to darle la mano a la otra o el otro, to put that ladder down for the next person, which is what has inspired me to do the work that I am doing today. Is just because.
And I do want to say something about that, Marilyn, because it's so important to the folks that are listening, because in the Latino community, it's a responsibility that we have to give back, because we've been given so much. I mean, it wasn't just the university, it's your parents leaving their homeland and going to a strange, very cold place. I've been to Connecticut. Exactly. What a difference from una isla tropical, where everybody knows everybody, where your family had been since the 1800s and were known and respected. And they go to Connecticut, you know, and do the best they can. My mother had a 5th grade education as well. And so, but you know, it was we learned so much resiliency. And it was that sense of responsibility that if your parents and people could give you that much opportunity, that you have a responsibility to play it forward. And that's not something that you learn necessarily in the dominant culture, where the I or the individual is more important than the collective.
Absolutely. You know, I always remember my mother. She works in a factory, and she would always bring in on her lunch you know, the lunch box, she would
CCC.
always put an extra sandwich in there. And I said to her one day, I said, mami, ¿para quién es eso? Entonces she would say, pues si acaso la otra mujer no tiene algo de comer. In
Ay,
case
qué
there's another woman
lindo.
that doesn't have something to eat, she always brought something extra. She always instilled those messages in me about the importance of what you just said, of how our community is there and supports each other. Is growing up with that message about how important it is to support community, to support other people, I think is what helps people like you and me and others continue this work, because it could be exhausting.
Exactly.
You could be like, oh God, I can't do this anymore. And then
Right.
all of a sudden something happens, like someone comes up to you and says, you know what, you changed my life.
Well, you
said-
know, Marilyn, I was at this conference in the mountains a few weeks ago, and this young woman came up to me and she said, I was in your youth leadership program when I was in my in high school in the 80s, early 80s. And she said, and now I work for the Denver Public Schools, and I'm in charge of Medicare, and I bring in $10 million for students to have Medicare. And this happens to me, you know, and you just have to go, because, you know, you're preparing these leaders. They're going to do great things because, you know, just by being in a leadership program, you say leader and you step up, just like you were talking about the Pygmalion effect. If you say, I'm going to be a leader, and you go in a leadership program, it opens up your vistas, and particularly because you have them do some application, which we'll talk about. You have them do some work as leaders to really lift themselves up. And so that's the beauty of this work, is that we can go back and see our community. Look at where we are today. Look at where Latinas are today. And it's been this paso a paso, step by step, all of us working together. And we didn't even know we were doing it. We were just doing what our families and our communities and our values told us to do.
Right.
But tell us all about Latinas in Power now. Here you are in in Connecticut. You get your degree, you're doing multicultural marketing, and all of a sudden this light bulb goes off that you want to train Latinas.
So the light bulb came off for me.
And you were probably the only one, which was really what happened.
I was an only, like many of us, they call them
Yeah.
the onlys, and I was
Yeah.
one of the onlys. But I think what happened with me is that I had reached a leadership level in a corporation, right? I was at a director level and was one of the onlys. So I would get invited to all of these VP and SVP meetings as representing, you know, the Latinos.
Yeah, go ahead and represent 67 million people.
Right. But you know, what was interesting is that I would look around and I didn't have any trusted champions that I could turn to say, hey, you know, like, how do you maneuver the waters? You know, how is it that you are able to understand what the what unspoken rules are? Who tells you about the unspoken rules? We didn't have those tools. Growing up, we were not prepared for working within, you know, the business and the corporate environment, right? Whereas
and even in education or any of the institutions, government, we weren't prepared to do the higher level.
Yeah. And the fact that there was so little representation at executive levels by Latinos, period, you know, made it even more difficult for you to have that trusted champion you could turn to say, hey, you know, like, you know, well, how do I do this? Who do I talk to? How do I, you know, overcome these obstacles? So what happened with us is that there was at least one Latina in each of the companies in the Hartford area. We're insurance capital of the world now, 25 years ago, right?
Wow.
So there was at least one Latina in a leadership role, and we would get together and talk about, how did you handle that situation? For example, when somebody made a derogatory remark in that team meeting about Puerto Ricans, like, what was your communication style? Did you want to go Bronx on them, or did you have a different communication style?
Well, I also say you have a double whammy there, because at that point, there weren't that many women either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what we found is we're sharing these stories with each other and helping each other. And it became a support network, because many of us came from the same backgrounds, came from inner city, and we're working our way through, you know, this whole corporate ladder. And so at one point, one of the women said, wow, this is so helpful. We need to bring more Latinas into this. They looked at me and said, Marilyn, you always organize things. I always started chapters. I always, you know, was the first one to say, hey, let's do this. And I said, okay, I will do it if your companies support me. And sure enough, they gave me full reign to create whatever it was. And I created Latinas and Power. As a Latina, I wanted to make sure that the name Latina was in there to say, we have arrived. We are ready to do business. And I wanted to also help reshape the image of Latinas, that we were not just these hoochie coochie, that the image that is also often seen of us, or passive or anything like that, that we're ready to do business and to level up, right?
Right. Take on leadership roles.
Yeah. And then I wanted to use the word and, not in, because we're not in power. It's not Latinas in power, it's Latinas and power. And then use the word power, because power is always something that we think someone else has, right? That we don't have the power. And I wanted to demystify the idea that we all have power, that it's all irrelevant. We make decisions for ourselves, for our family, for our community, and that is power, and that is influence. How do we then get power? What is it? What is power? How do you get it? And something I learned from you, how do you pass it on? Because you are constantly sharing your power with other people. And that is a power of example, Juana. I want you to know that. You have, it's contagious, because now you have an army behind you of people like me that believe that whatever influence we have must be shared with others, that it's not something that you keep to yourself and then you move into your merry way and have a successful life. No, that is not how we were raised. That is not our culture. And so that's, so the name Latinas in Power stuck 22 years later. The first year that I put together a conference, 186 women showed up, word of mouth, no advertising. And you know what they said to me? They go, Marilyn, please don't stop. They had tears in their eyes. They said, oh my this gosh. Is the first time that I felt like I'm seen, that I belong. And it was this camaraderie of unbelievable power that is why I continued it. It was off the side of my desk. It was my pay it forward for 18 years until I hit retirement age. And then I said, okay, this is my purpose.
Well, so we just had another conversation yesterday. There's no retirement.
There's no retirement. There is no retirement.
Leadership is a lifelong commitment, really. I will keep by the way, I was talking to Heidi Soto, who's the city attorney. She says, I can only grow so many tomatoes.
No, there's no.
I'm going to stay working.
I transitioned from the corporate world into now what I have built is now a nonprofit 4 years ago. Companies, people were saying, Marilyn, we love what you're doing, but we want more, because there is a need. You talked about it.
Oh, of course there is. Well, I mean, think about our growth. 51% of the growth in the US is attributed to Latinos. So even if we're working as hard as we can, we've got this growth. We've got a third of us coming in through immigration. So it really is, you know, I always say that it's not about one or two leaders. It's about a critical mass of leaders, an army of leaders, leaders everywhere doing things from in the schools to the churches, to the nonprofits, to business world, to the government. We need to be everywhere. If we're really going to change society.
And it's not just one group doing this work. It's all over the country. There's these phenomenal Latina organizations that in Houston and in Texas and Miami, and that's phenomenal. I think what is missing here is that we need to unify and to bring these organizations that are doing like-minded work together so that we can have a stronger voice. I think that that is part of, you know, one of the pieces that is missing from this whole picture. But I can tell you that 4 years ago, after creating this phenomenal conference, which you were a speaker 10 years ago, I bring in Latina speakers from all over the country to share their story, to inspire and encourage everybody. And they walk away going, I loved Juana's story. I love her story. I love this story. And they connected in a way where it leads them to say, oh, maybe I can do that too. The same thing. So when people started saying to me, Marilyn, we want more, I knew that I needed to grow what I had, the platform. And so I turned it into a nonprofit, 501c3, and began to get grants. And with those grants, the first thing that I did, Juana, is that I ran some focus groups. focus groups of Latinas telling me what it was that was missing on their career track, on their business track. We took that information and we created a report called the Latina Pathway to Excellence.
I wanted to talk to you about that report because that was a dynamite report.
Yeah, our first
ahead.
published report. And in that report, Latinas were saying first of all, they wanted everything but the kitchen sink. In terms of if you create, because our question to them was, if we create a leadership learning platform, what are you looking for? They wanted writing skills. They wanted financial skills. They wanted, business acumen. They wanted public speaking. They wanted everything in there saying, we're lacking everything. And what was interesting about this report is that when you compare it to other reports that have been written about Latinas in the past 10 or 15 years, we haven't moved the needle. We have not really made a big impact in terms of the growth opportunities that are available. So, in fact, a new report that just came out by Lean In, as you probably know, it's the State of Latinas in Corporate America. It shares the same thing that we've been learning all along. Right. So, that is why it's important to have these learning experiences that are affinity-based, because affinity-based experiences will open the door much quicker where we can be vulnerable and we can
authentic because we're talking about where we came from and who we
came from and all of that. So with that information, I was able to then get more grant money and launch, a curriculum, a leadership program that was based on the research that we learned called the Latinas in Leadership Institute. It launched last June of 2023, and that cohort already graduated. Cohort 2 is graduating in October. I'm now just finalizing interviews for cohort 3, which will start in September. And as you know, we're using your book.
Just think about this. She's on fire. There's no retirement. What I love about it is that when we leave our traditional jobs, if you want to call it that, I started writing, you started doing your Latinas in Power, it really gives us the opportunity to take it to the next level. And I wanted to pick up on that with you, Marilyn, because it really is true. Our community has a dynamic where we start lots of small organizations, but the truth of the matter is we have to start consolidating because you can't have impact and influence if you're too small, because we're really dealing with a huge system that we're trying to move in a different direction, and you can't do that with small groups. So it is our challenge for the young people that are listening. How do we grow our organizations? How do we merge them? How do we have a united front? How do we begin to look at Latinos as a unified force?
I think it's about being open to collaborations. It doesn't mean that you need to merge. I think it's more about collaborating with each other. So if Dr. Yasmin Davids has a leadership program in Los Angeles, how can I be a feeder to her program? How can other programs that are maybe working with more entry-level Latinas in terms of the learning platforms be a feeder into my program? How could we support each other and not reinvent the wheel each time? Because we've got it. We've got some phenomenal work that is being done out here by Latinas in this country. People are looking at us and going, what the heck is going on with Latinas?
Well, we're starting all the small businesses for one thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's another great part. Well, tell us a little bit about youth as well, because one of the things I noticed about your conference is that you had so many young people. And, for those of us who have been to conferences and so forth, I think we have to go back and remember how excited we were that first time we walked into a room, and here were all these Latinas doing all these different things, and really being able to tap into not only their knowledge, but to build those relationships.
Yeah, and that's really important. The first few years, I didn't have young people attend the conference because we're just barely, creating our space. But within a couple of years, it was very apparent to me that we needed to bring high school students so that they could start to see people that looked like them on stage. And so we started bringing high school students, first from the Hartford area. This last conference that I just had almost 100 high school students attending. And what I did is I worked with the superintendents of the schools. And guess what? Here in Connecticut, we have 4 Latina superintendents in Connecticut in different communities.
See, so that's what we were talking about. Wow.
So you see, once you have representation in certain levels that are the decision makers that are able to then say, yes, we're going to take that bus and we're going to let them go to your conference, and then we're going to have that bus pick it up. I mean, it's some basic things like that.
Right.
So in Hartford, it started off with Dr. Leslie Torres Rodriguez. She's been doing this for years. She's the superintendent of schools of Hartford. She does not let, she goes, Marilyn, when's the conference? We're going to plug it into the schedule. We'll make sure that the counselors know what's going on. They're going to get full credit for being in school that day. This is considered a field trip, professional development. You got to get into that space.
Yes,
So
yes.
now we have 7 towns that came to this last conference. And what we do with them is, number one, we have them stand up right at the top of the day, and we acknowledge them, and they get a round of applause from everybody that's there. I then let people know is go up to one of them during the day, introduce yourself. I say to both of them, introduce yourself, tell them what you're interested in doing in your life, anything like that. So what we did with the high school track this year that was really interesting is that in their workshop, we did a piece on networking, how to network. Oh my gosh, it was so phenomenal, because most of the time
Well, they network, but it's not usually around what am I going to do with my future?
No, usually they have somebody talking at them saying, here's why it's important to go to college, you know, and then you have some people that talk about what they do. No, it was so interactive. They didn't want to stop. They got so much out of that. So I want to encourage other people to think about doing those kinds of things. It doesn't have to be at a conference.
Well, you know, the other thing is,
but young people don't know what it.
Yeah, and I like the way in your program, we'll talk about it a little bit, you have people engage and do projects and so forth. But in the leadership programs that I run, people have a responsibility to mentor 2 people younger than them, because this intergenerational leadership thing is so important in our community, because half of us are under 18 or 40% or something. It's a lot. Latinos are young. 900,000 of us turn 18 every year, you know, so we have this younger generation that we have to groom. So if you're a leader, or if it doesn't even matter, you wouldn't even have to call yourself a leader, because you can reach out to a high school student, a junior high student, you can reach out to a college student, and just be there for them to kind of support them, because it's still rough waters that they have to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, there's a lot of work to be done, Juana. I mean, we are just scratching the surface in terms of reaching our communities in significant ways. One of the things in the leadership program that we have right now that we learned from the research that we did is that Latinas felt a little disconnected because they were focusing so much on their career and their family. They're juggling. They don't have time. They didn't have time for anything else. So they were saying in our research that we feel disconnected. And what the pandemic did is that it reset everything in terms of your priorities, in terms of what was the most important thing to them. So the reset button is now where they're taking care of themselves is at the top of the list, family, career, and then community. And they wanted to do something significant to give back to the community. So what we did is we incorporated a capstone project in our leadership program where the women work in teams to write a report about issues impacting the Latino community. And in fact, those reports from Capstone 1 are getting published as op-eds during Hispanic Heritage Month of this
how
fall.
fabulous.
Yeah, so the topics.
What are some of the topics?
Disparities in education, health equity with a focus on mental wellness in the Latina community. And I say wellness, not mental health, because I believe that the taboo connected with mental health issues is so powerful, especially in the Latina community. Es una loca, you know, that kind of thing that we need to kind of dismantle some of that. The power of the Latino voter. That's the first one that's going to be.
Is really important.
I can't wait to send them to you. And then the last one is financial literacy and wealth management. So those are the kind of like the 4 banners that they give. And then what the women do is they hone in on something specific. So for disparities in education, that group focused in on the transition from high school and how so many drop, we lose so many in that transition time to go on to whether it's a vocational school, a community college, or four-year college, whatever that is, how many we lose and why. So there's interviews in there. So I think the articles are going to be not anything that is new, but more eyeballs on these issues that we need to continue addressing and making sure that people can articulate what the challenge and barriers are and what some of the solutions and interventions are. So remember when I said that they wanted everything but the kitchen sink? Well, what I did is I sprinkled in a lot of those things into the leadership program. Our leadership program is focusing on 4 pillars: growth mindset, starting to, here's where you are, what does that journey look like, where and how do you even start to not see imposter syndrome as your go-to, and to really be your authentic self. And so the authenticity is the second pillar. Leadership influence, which we're using your book under that pillar, and you come in as a speaker to our program and showing what other women are doing in terms of their leadership influence in the country. And then the last pillar is the capstone project under civic engagement and social justice issues. That addresses the need for women to be more connected with their community and to be able to articulate those issues. You know what they're saying is,
that's exactly right, to be able to articulate those issues.
And what they're saying is, I had no idea when I started this project on, like, for example, financial literacy. I didn't understand it. I knew the word financial literacy, wealth management, but I didn't really. And now they're talking about it and they can be speakers on it because they've done the research and they're publishing, bragging rights, their first report.
Right. Well, I love that because it gives them so much credibility.
Yeah, exactly.
And practice. And because they're doing it, the other thing I like about it is the group focus, because Latinos are group oriented. We're not individualistically oriented. So if you do it with a group, you have that support, you share ideas, there's collaboration, there's synergy. So I'm very excited. I can't wait to see these reports that have come out.
They'll be coming out in September.
Yeah. And so for those of you that are listening, remember, all of this begins with yourself, with your authenticity.
It began with just with an idea. And then I said to myself, you have the audacity to think that you could stand up an institute? I questioned myself to say, because
of course,
let's do this. And then
we all do this.
Guess what? I did it. And people came on board to support me. And now it has taken off in a way where we were able to raise $350,000 in a 6-month window to stand up the Institute, because it is really important that we are able to subsidize and provide scholarships for women who cannot afford to go into a learning program, right? Mm-hmm. Companies can afford it. The tuition for my program is $6,500. Corporations can afford it. They have professional development dollars, but we don't only want corporate Latinas. We want diversity of background. So we have nonprofit directors, small community-based organizations. We have government and municipal employees, small business owners, and academia. Representation of all those different areas. And guess what happens? When we're at the table having conversation, the diversity of thought is so valuable and rich. And that is really where a lot of the ideas and interventions and solutions come from the diversity of thought.
Beautiful. You know, I wanted to pick up on the fact that you said that you kind of turned the pyramid around, where the taking care of yourself comes first, and then your family, then the community and your business and so forth. But it starts with you. It's a mindset. And we weren't trained that way.
Nope.
You know, we were trained to be givers and to take care of others.
We're not there yet. We're not there yet.
No. But I wanted to know if you had a few tips for the women that are listening on how to make that shift, because if you don't take care of yourself, how are you going to take care of the family or the community or do a good job? And by the way, people like you and me, because we do so much, we have to constantly be managing it. And, I was on my bike this morning, and it's just something that needs to become part of it. So how did you get women to really start thinking about that and start making that shift?
There's a lot of analogies out there that can be used, but the one that everybody knows is about being a passenger on an airplane.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I
You
love that.
to put your oxygen mask on first, and then you take care of your child. When people think about that, they go, oh, because if my health and in my mental stability is not there, how am I going to be a good parent or spouse or anything else? You must take care of yourself. Self-care is number one. So what I do in the morning, and this takes practice, is I have my readings. I have a reading in the morning. I spend half an hour just kind of like getting into where am I today? How am I feeling? Getting those affirmations and those readings that you have. And then I do, this Calm. It's an app. It's a 10-minute meditation.
Oh yeah, I know that app. Calm.
Yeah, it's fabulous. But
Yeah.
my point there is that you need to take that seriously. Don't do it once and then they go, I did it I don't have time today.
Right.
Get up an extra half hour early and invest in yourself, invest in your well-being. And that is one of the messages that I really hope people walk away with, how important that is to incorporate that into your routine. And then it becomes routine. And then when you don't do it, they go, oh my goodness, like, no wonder I'm off.
So anyway, well, tell us a little bit about how you see the Latina future, because I always say today, el futuro es Latino, the future is Latino, or really Latina. And in fact, I dedicate my book to the first Latino president who has been born, and I say it's going to be a Latina.
I think it is. Somebody asked me that I was interviewed yesterday for a newspaper article, and they said, when do you think there will be a Latina president? And I said, in 8 years. I said to her,
I want to be alive, so it's got to be.
I didn't skip. Well, Kamala's first, right?
Yes.
Kamala's first. I'm sorry if I'm showing my but
well, I think we're women, and
then in 8 years it's a Latina, and then so I said in 8 years, when she finishes her term. So but to answer your question, what is the future? I really do believe that Latinas are positioned to be one of the most influential voices of leadership in this country, and maybe even globally. So and I just believe it's because it's in our DNA. It is that we really do have what it takes. And, sadly, we are still very underrepresented in C-suite and across the board. That new report that just came out from Lean In, it's less than 1% in C-suite, and SVP, it's 1.5%.
Wow.
Less than 4% in management role. And this is compared to almost 30% of white women in these same roles. So the fact that we are underrepresented in leadership roles across all sectors is one of the biggest challenges that we face, and why we have not been getting the kind of opportunities that are needed. We keep getting overlooked for those promotions, those stretch assignments, and that rung that rung is broken for us to get to that level. And a lot of it has to do with, who's in leadership roles, that there's still a lot of microaggressions that take place, not just in the workplace, but in across the board, that make Latinas feel like they don't belong, no matter how ambitious they are, that we're just not being given those opportunities. So in terms of the future, I think as long as we could have programs like what you are doing, what I am doing, more programs like this to help Latinas understand how important their voice is. One of the things that Latinas talk about in my program, you probably heard this, is, Marilyn, I had no idea that this is what I was looking for. This program I'm on right now this is what I was looking for, and I didn't know what it was. We have built this Comadre ship, and I want to say ship because a newspaper article written about the work that we are doing recently, called it the Comadre ship sailing through the Northeast.
Oh,
It's
I
a
love it.
private article.
Yeah.
What the women are saying is that they needed this network of affinity-based mindsets that are helping them believe in themselves a little bit more and to be more comfortable with their voice, that being able to say, I'm so afraid to speak in public, is something that they could share in this group and that we could help them overcome.
Yes.
So, these women are talking about, here's my gaps, here's what I'm afraid of, in a company of other Latinas that are like-minded. So I think that if we can continue those learning platforms, like what you're doing, what Yasmin is doing in LA, and what we're doing, that it will help us build more representation. This report that just came out, it's called The State of Latinas in Corporate America by Sheryl Sandberg's group Lean In. A white woman is sounding the alarm on the drop in representation of Latinas in leadership and advocacy roles in this country. A white woman is saying this.
Right.
And they did this first ever report on this, and she's talking about how the goalpost keeps moving for us.
Yes.
Talking about how in the workplace, Latinas have less flexibility. They're less trusted to work remotely. I mean, this is what they have been learning based on the research that they're conducting. And those microaggressions that are telling us, so you've probably heard this. You're in a group and people will say a comment or an insult about our culture. And then they'll say to us, oh, but you're different, then
Right.
you're the exception. Like that's supposed to be a compliment, and that is an insult. These microaggressions continue to be taking place. The fact that 37% of Latinas say they are the onlys in their position, whether it's a management role, whether it's a leadership role, compared to only 10% of white women. That's
Right.
almost 40% of Latinas are saying, I'm the only one there. So we need to start addressing that whole idea of we're always going to be onlys if we don't have Latinas in roles that could champion and mentor other Latinas. There's just not enough of us. So,
Well, one thing I was going to add, especially for the folks that are listening that may not have looked at not just microaggressions, but when you look at, for example, you didn't think you were smart, your high school counselor.
I
didn't think I
internalized
was smart till I got to graduate school, and we're smart. And so you have these messages that we're not smart enough, maybe because you don't have professors that look like us, or, people that write the books. I mean, 95% of books are still written by white authors. And but my point is that we can only break through this collectively. Because if you don't do it collectively in your group where people say, oh, I didn't know I was smart. And you say, I didn't know I was smart. And I go like, hey, I didn't know I was smart. And then you're sitting there and we've passed all the tests. Of course we're smart.
Right. Exactly.
We're doing research, we're doing writing, and so it has to be a collective process. And that's why groups and networks and mentoring and the comadraza, women coming together, is so important. So it is.
But we also, as a community, have to overcome some things and to start really looking at our own behaviors around colorism, around the fact that the gender gap for Latinas. This report showed that compared to white men, in terms of the gender pay gap, compared to white men, the first group closest is Asian women, making 83 cents on the dollar. And then it's white women at 78 cents on the dollar. And then it's Black women at 66 cents on the dollar. Then it's Native American women. And then it's Latinas at the very bottom. At 64 in management roles, it's 64 cents on the dollar, but in general, across the board, it's closer to 56 cents on the dollar.
Mhm.
So women, Latinas, are $1.2 million behind. It will take us until 2090 to level the playing field.
Oh,
So when
unless we organize, unless we get
unless
involved
we organize.
in the Latino organizations. And I think that's a really important message now that we're ending our interview, is like, how do we get women to really become activist again? Because we really need a new wave of saying, this is not okay. We are the ones doing the hard work in America. We're the highest participation of any group in the labor market. We work hard. And it's time for us to move into these positions of influence and power. And not just for ourselves, but because America needs our values.
Yeah, yeah.
They
Well,
need our sense of community, our sense of generosity, our sense of hard work, our sense of sharing, collaboration. All the things that Latinos do to keep our communities intact is what is needed in America today. So, I think we're ready to make that contribution, but I really want to encourage the women that are listening to get into a leadership program if you haven't been into one, to think about mentoring young people if you have that capacity, to start thinking about taking care of yourself so that you have the energy and the power to lead. I mean, there's so many lessons here, Marilyn, that you're sharing with our people. And I think it's really time for us to say, ya basta, es nuestra hora. Let's do this, and let's do it together, and let's do it now. So I wanted to end with this, by the way. Are we ready? So I want everybody to go, I have the power.
I have the power.
You have the power.
You have the power.
We have the power. Latinas leaders are rising. So I hope this just really has inspired all of you to get involved. Look at what one person can do, that Marilyn has been there. And by the way, she has stood her ground. She has been in Connecticut since she was a child. And here she is now expanding nationally. And it's so important for Latinas to understand that we are Latinas and power. We are ready to make our mark. So thank you so much, Marilyn, for being with us. The next time I see you, we will dance some salsa together.